It's good to be back. I was here last year. I was asked last year to give the closing provocation, so I think this might be an upgrade. And I couldn't say no to coming back because, as you can imagine, I get invited to quite a few conferences, and most of them are deadly boring, and it's mainly sitting still and being talked at, and sometimes there's vaguely interesting points, and then if you're really lucky, then there are folks you can hang out with during the breaks or after hours that makes it worthwhile going, but that is my main experience with conferences. So I was so delighted when I was here last year and discovered that there was this conference full of kind of playful learning. I got to pet a kangaroo at the conference, I mean, seriously, he's dead now, unfortunately, and I think the only reason why he let me kind of patiently pet him was because he was a very old kangaroo, but he lives in the sanctuary here on campus, which in and of itself is amazing, having a campus that actually has a wildlife sanctuary, and I can't wait to see the new building and so on. And it was full of really generative learning spaces, and just incredibly inspiring for me to be here. So thank you for having me back this year, and I'm really honored to be here. I like the stuff that's moving and growing in Australia, and so it's been a real joy being here this time around, getting to visit some of the places that are involved in all this work on compassionate systems change. So, how many of you were here last year? Okay, I was just wondering if I could kind of just take off with where I ended last year, but that's probably not a good idea since that was only about a quarter of people or so. So, I run this organization, the Center for Systems Awareness, and lead our research effort at MIT, all kind of related to trying to understand how we can create compassionate systems change in the world. And I will say, over the last couple of days, there's been kind of pre-meetings leading up to this conference. And on Wednesday night, I went to the University of Melbourne to give a Dean's lecture there, and right before I started the lecture, I checked the news, and it was pretty significantly clear that Trump was going to win the election. I'm partially from Denmark and partially from the US. I live in both countries, and of course my organization and my lab are both kind of in the US, half of my family American, and so it was intense. And so I've been very emotional these last couple of days. Not so much because I'm a particularly political being, I'm really not. I am all about life and living systems, and I mostly actually don't really understand politics because I think it's not about the actual relevant things in life. So I try to not have too much of a kind of an orientation towards that. Probably I don't really understand it. However, one thing that I do understand it is my profound and deep belief that whatever people believe in, they should be allowed to believe in, and I will defend that to the day I die. I just feel that it should be so for everyone. That goes all the way around, so that if other people believe in something that's different from what you believe in, then that's okay too. And I feel that way about people, generally speaking. So this is not about, oh no, the Republicans won. This is about that bigotry, and racism, and lying, and misogyny, and hatred won the kind of most influential, the election of the most influential country in this world. And it made me so profoundly sad and full of grief, because I'm like, are we still stuck here? I almost can't handle it, because there are so many really vital and important things that we need to take into account, and we can't do that when we increase polarization and when we consistently think that it's okay to lie your way into office or to just pretend that things are not existing. And the land of the free, self-announced land of the free, elected somebody who is running to become a dictator. And it seems like a complete and utter breakdown. So I was really grieving, and then I became angry, and that's a kind of a regular pattern. And I was inspired by what you just said, Dave. Well said. Because we work with this, part of this framework is how do we deal with these emotions when they show up? And so as I was kind of leaving one of the sessions early yesterday, because I felt I just needed a little bit of downtime so I could show up in a good way today, I kind of thought that it was a real teaching moment, because I'll just walk you through what actually happened for me in a moment of kind of, I felt under pressure, I felt breakdown, I experienced all these emotions, because people so often ask me, why is this compassionate systems work so important? And I always tell people, come to a workshop and then we can have the conversation. But this is just a kind of a mini walkthrough of what then happened in me. So I felt the grief. I was literally crying as I drove down in the car yesterday to go to the meetings down here on campus. And I was just emotional about being, you know, in this kind of suspended state. I felt like, you know, I felt like I wanted to go home. I just want to go home. I want to close my door. I want to shut out the world. I can't deal with this right now. As you can imagine, I'm constantly kind of on the move. I'm in many different countries around the world, and I just felt this kind of whatever. And then I started getting angry. This is a kind of a traditional response in my system. When I get really sad about something, I discover why it makes me angry also. So I got really frustrated, and in the Airbnb, the reason how I noticed that happened was because I started kind of grumbling about the neighbors in the Airbnb where I am. I could hear them slamming doors, like, shut up, and stuff like that. I hadn't noticed them at all until that moment, so I was like, oh, okay, this is going on as well. And I started kind of reflecting on where is this coming from. So not only do I have such deep concern for the state of affairs in the world right now, and it feels like that the whole kind of the types of breakdowns that we are bound to see over the next couple of decades are going to be accelerated by this new reality that just got kind of pushed into existence. So that's the one thing. I hold that as a kind of a deep concern, particularly, of course, for those who don't hold voice, right? From kids, unborn kids, what's going to happen to future generations if this is the trajectory that we're on, and so on, for the state of the climate, for, you know, nature and so on, but also for the people who are the oppressed. What happens when so many strong men around the world start leading the world, and so on and so forth. So all of that gave me deep concern. And then I tried to take perspective, because the real place is I don't really understand why people, and this is not about politics, it's really not. I pride myself of leading work that's apolitical. I work with people across all religions and across most of the spectrums I know about. So this is not about politics, but I don't know why people vote for somebody who's clearly lying and spreading words that are, you know, not just untrue, but full of hate and fear-mongering and all that. And so part of this work, aside from the whole work I did with kind of analyzing my own emotions and figuring out, okay, what am I responding to, I started perspective taking, which is just a kind of a key lens into trying to understand where is all this coming from? How is that the response? And so on and so forth. It brought me here today where I had forgiven, I literally ended with a thought before I went to bed. I have forgiven my parents, I have forgiven myself, I can forgive the rest of the world when I'm able to do that. And so I moved through that whole space in that way. So I don't know if this is the least bit meaningful or helpful or anything to any of you, but I was just thinking that it's a very kind of practical example of, I was in a very emotional state, I felt under pressure, I didn't know what to do, and I could help myself move through that and out of it through these tools and practices, and really having internalized what it means to live from this compassionate systems orientation. I will forgive these people, and I will wish the best for them, also for Trump, also for all the others that are into fear-mongering, hatred, and so on, because I do think that that is the only way. I watched the movie, obviously, it's a great thing to do in a state like that, and it was one of those, you know, dystopian future movies, because I felt that was probably best to put on the menu for the night, and I noticed that the responses in those movies, which many of which I love, you know, The Matrix or Star Wars or whatever, I love these movies, and the responses are always more of the same. It always becomes violent. It always has to be in a particular way where it's heart against heart and so on. And so many people always quote Einstein for saying you can't solve the problem with the problems that created, you know, with the same mindset that created the problems in the first part. And so to me, compassion is really the revolutionary act of trying to do something profoundly differently. Because now pushing back and increasing polarization is not going to get us anywhere. So that was where I ended last night and where I'm meeting you from today. We are, I'm a biologist, as you heard, and I had the incredible gift of being in training. I was an apprentice of an amazing professor of biosymbiotics, which is a kind of a particular sort of philosophy of nature. So all I was ever introduced to is how nature is profoundly interconnected. And that, of course, has infused my thinking my whole life. So what we're doing is we're working with living systems change. Many of you have been involved in different strategies for systems change, I'm sure. Most of the systems change people do never really actually produces outcomes of systems change. And my dear friend and colleague Peter, whom I co-founded these two organizations with, of course, was trained at MIT in systems dynamics, which is a kind of a prominent pathway of systems thinking, a school of systems thinking. It's coming out of engineering. So it's great, and I've learned a lot from it, and it can do a lot of things, but it doesn't really tell us much about what it means to be living systems. Because living systems are organic and they grow. And that means that they can't be scaled, and it also means that they can't be replicated. And so those are the two primary things that people always focus on when doing systems change. How can we scale this, and how can it be replicated? And the sad news is it can't. It grows, but you can have ideas about how to grow it well, and we'll talk a little bit about that now. So one thing is the kind of a foundational piece of systems thinking is that structure shapes behavior. And I like to take that down to very practical things, like, for example, the structure of human legs is that, for example, we have knees and ankles, and knees bend in one direction and not really the other direction, which is great, because if it was a kind of, wasn't there to have the constraints that it has, we wouldn't be able to walk. So structure shapes behavior, and this is the particular behavior of this particular structure is that we're actually able to be upright and walking, and so on and so forth. So there's nothing mystical about that. It just means that the structures in place are producing exactly the outcomes that it was designed to produce. This is important for education, obviously, because I often am confronted with people saying, oh, but the system is broken. And I'm like, no, the system is not broken. The system is designed to produce exactly the outcomes that it's producing, which is why we need systems change in education. We cannot just keep adding a lot of great stuff over a shitty structure that really doesn't work, because it will consistently continue to produce outcomes of declining mental health and well-being, burnout, stress, anxiety, depression, and so on and so forth, outcomes that we are seeing the full scale of in these years, and that are probably going to increase unless we do something dramatically about it. In this whole understanding of systems awareness that we're working with, this is pretty basic. When we talk about the underlying structure, we talk about our mental models. How are we seeing things? How are we habitually relating to things? How are we feeling about things? What are my biases? What are my blind spots? What's my kind of cultural imprint? The lenses through which I'm able to see the world. Those are our mental models. That's the truth that we each hold. And when you meet somebody, and it's an opportune moment here, and there are people from so many different cultures, go meet someone from a very different culture than your own, and look, they hold different mental models. And we all do, because they can be deeply personal, but there's also a cultural aspect of it. When we think about things, we think about them from this stance of our mental models. That's the only way we're able to actually reflect on things. And so that means that things that we shape, the physical manifestations, the artifacts, are shaped by our mental models. That's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the new building here, because it sounds to me as if this new building that I haven't seen yet is shaped by a mental model of compassionate systems. It is an organic, living system in and of itself, and it's regenerative in a way that we rarely see, and that I really aspire to see much more of in the future. So I'm really excited about that. But basically, we have a quote that we often use from Winston Churchill, who said, first we shape the walls. Let's see if I can find is there a little thingy that will make me point? No. First we shape the walls, that's the artifacts, and then the walls shape us, that's our mental models. So when we're thinking about education, for example, we've all gone through education, and it's shaped our thinking about education, and that is one of the reasons why it's one of the most rigid systems on this planet to try to change. So last year when I was here, we were in the kind of, I had this ambitious, tiny idea that if we are to actually study compassionate systems change, we have to develop new methodologies for studying it, because if we just overlay old school reductionistic scientific principles over something that has subtleties of sense of belonging and what's my sense of purpose and how deeply do I feel connected and what's the generative social field and so on, we would miss out on all the secret sauce. And that's why we established the lab at MIT, and I say it just so, as if it happened overnight, which was really not the case. It took years. But the reason why we did that was really to begin to be able to develop methodologies that were kind of adequate for measuring the types of things that we're looking to see with this work. And since I'm the executive director for the center, and then also the research director at the lab, I became a little busy. And these things take a little, they take a lot of time, because for me at least, it's not something that's just kind of prefabricated in my mind. I really have to think about things a lot and learn a lot from other people and so on. So when I was here last year, one of the things that I kind of shared was where we were at that time. That was why I was checking how many of you had been here, because, you know, I would hate to repeat myself and contribute to yet another boring session at a conference. So I'll do my best to not do that. Just keep track of time here. So the ecosystem of education, usually when people talk about ecosystems, you know, I'm a biologist and I'm the sophisticate that Dave showed us in the beginning. I was trained in academia. We're really good at sophisticating, right? We know exactly which are the right theories and who should ask the right questions and this and that. So when people talk about ecosystems coming from a space of having really studied ecosystems, I'm like, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. And so I tried to just look at what is this ecosystem of education. Well, of course, it's in society and it's full of families. And these families, some of these are parents and some of them are children. And there's all kinds of other layers. This is still a slightly reduced model, but then the children become students, and some of the teachers, of course, are in families, and some of them are parents, and all of these, the teachers, the students, and so on, form the classroom, and so on and so forth. These are basically the layers of the system of education, at least that we have access to and can work with in many places. Dave mentioned that we had people from British Columbia. It's one of the places in the world where the compassionate systems framework is at all the layers of the system, if you will, and all the hierarchies. So we work with the Ministry of Education there, and there's funding for all the district to work directly with compassionate systems change. So we're in at the ministry level, at the district leadership level, at the school building level with the students and some community organizations and at the university and so on. So that's a good kind of portion of the ecosystem. In California, we work with the State Department of Education as well. And you know, all the various kind of fractions, if you will, or hierarchies of the system of education in the state of California, which, by the way, is a pretty messy system. So it's been a very rewarding and weird and wild journey in many ways. We've been there for the last 7 years. The places that we work in California, I just want to make this point, but these are all feedback loops, of course, which we see in, you know, systems dynamics. And even though that means that we can create, you know, mapping that is non-linear, it's still a mechanistic understanding, because it doesn't tell us anything about how things grow. So when we're talking about a living system, we have to remember this thing first, that it's intergenerational. And that's what I just talked about before. Everybody went to school. So everybody has a mindset about what it means to go to school. And most parents in most places have gone to school, and they know that, you know, it's not supposed to be fun. You're supposed to learn math and science and literacy. You're supposed to get good grades so that you can move on in life. Most people on this planet still, if you ask them, they'll have a kind of a pretty fixed mindset about what school is, and it means teacher in front of the classroom, kids sitting in rows, and being kind of fueled with information. And I don't know about you all, but I've seen Google recently, and I also learned about AI recently. And that whole mental model of a teacher standing in front of the classrooms and kids sitting in rows just does not seem to be adequate for the actual lived reality that we're in right now.
But that doesn't mean that that mindset goes away, because we habituate. We have habitual understanding of what it is that we're looking at. So this intergenerationality of the ecosystem of education is really intense. And it is one of the ways in which it's kept a very rigid place, right? It's full of parents that have all kinds of ideas about what school should be. And homework is a good thing and so on. And we know that homework actually doesn't work. Hope there's students in the room here. Homework doesn't work. But still, that's just the kind of based on this mental model. In addition to it being intergenerational, it's emotionally nested. What does that mean? Well, it means that every single individual who participates in this ecosystem comes with a particular set of emotions. And part of why I walked you through how I was processing all these emotions before was usually we get stuck in them. Most of us don't actually, that was actually the case for me for many, many years at least. We're not able to label them. We don't know how to name them properly. We can say I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm happy, and that's about it. But this whole kind of journey of analyzing what's actually going on in my own system, which is what we call emotional literacy, is essential for us to be able to operate with a kind of a sense of agency in the world. And in all of these layers, it's emotionally lested, right? The parents have particular emotions for their children as they're in the schools, and the teacher holds, emotionality with each and every kid in different ways. And the kids, of course, all of the emotions that they have with each other going on all the time in the classroom, and how they feel about this teacher versus that teacher and so on. It can be totally overpowering. Anybody ever tried when your emotions became a little overpowering? Is only one person raising their hand? That is really the case. You all need to do that wheel of emotion that they've talked about. There's room for learning there. And then in addition to that, of course, we make sense. Our emotion fuels our sense making. So there's layers of meaning, penetrating all of these layers. So what do we mean about school? What does it mean to be in the classroom? How am I making sense of the world as I'm moving through it, and so on and so forth? And that is individual as well. So this is more of a kind of an adequate model of a living system, which is why we don't know actually how to study it. The complexity is not just that it's families, in society, in schools, with kids, and so on and so forth, but that all of that other stuff is there as well. Who's barking? No? No one? Okay. And those are kind of the layers that we're trying to take into account as we're studying living systems change. So obviously there needs to be a new methodology developed in order to be able to do that, because nobody knows how to study these things. In the spaces we work in California, we actually have direct access to the teachers, the students, the classrooms, the schools, what they call expanded learning, so all the learning that happens outside of school, the districts, the counties, and the State Department of Education, plus other agencies that are at the state level. And that's just a kind of a really incredible opportunity to actually work with systems change, because we have access to all of these different layers of the hierarchy of the system. And now, so with this understanding of living systems change, what are we going to do about that? Well, how can we begin to understand what it is that we're studying when we're in this kind of the layers of complexity that was just there on the previous slide? And I am very inspired by nature, and I believe that evolution is pretty smart. Nature is pretty smart, and evolution is a great strategy for stuff that's have been trialed and errored for eons. Mycelium, does anybody know? Anybody seen the fantastic fungi thing on Netflix? Okay, so mycelium is basically what fungi is all about. So it's a web that's underground. You see the fruiting buddies, they're like a mushroom. You see them above ground, but underground there's a web that's kind of widely dispersed. It looks like a neural network, and it grows into ecosystems and across ecosystems, bringing nutrients and information all around. So when we are operating as we are, as a community-based organization working with a global community to really be of support for compassionate systems change, primarily in education, but I'll get to that later, not just education. We're trying to model something that seems to work really well in other places in nature. So we try to model ourselves as a mycelium-based organization. This is what we mean by our living system. So we're the mushrooms, and we can put some words to it. The mushrooms are the actual fruit buddies are producing spores, and the spores become little kind of threads of hyphae. When the hyphae connect, it becomes a mycelium. The mycelium then produces little kind of clusters that are primordiums that have the kind of opportunity to grow into a new mushroom. And the way that we see ourselves in all of this is, if the Center for Systems Awareness is the mother mushroom, if you will, then what we send out into to our community is ideas and information and generative nutrients, everything that we know that can really be of support to grow the global community. That's what we do. And then, when people come through our individual trainings, our workshops, there's one next week, you can still sign up if you will. We can say that, well, that's the spores that are kind of dispersed out into the world. We can't really know. But some of those spores immediately fall into community. We hear ever so often when people come through our training, which is incredibly rewarding, of course, that found my tribe, or finally people who are thinking like me, or this is what I want to do, and it's been transformational and so on, which is incredibly both humbling and really, really rewarding, as you can imagine. So then they become part of the mycelium. Some people really, get hooked, and they become master practitioners, and then we have a number of those around here. And the master practitioners are the people who go through a year-long, really intensive training, who are leading the work on the ground. And so they have the opportunity to then grow local mushrooms. And right now we're in process with growing our first local mushroom in British Columbia, where our idea is that our job at the center is more or less to just support the people on the ground to do the work so that it can grow. And we want to be able to do that in as many places as possible, because that is, the kind of whole global is everywhere, which means that the work has to happen locally. And part of the many conversations that I've been in here in Australia over the last week and a half has been about, is it time for us to have a local Australian mushroom as well? So that's how this is our mental model about how we're organized and what we're here to do. This is still not looking as it should, but this is our when we're then studying this, the mycelium, what we do is we overlay it with our model for systems change. It's the mandala for systems change. Many of you have been introduced to that in various ways. In this mandala for systems change, we use that as a kind of a lens that we can overlay on a particular area of the mycelium, of this system that we're trying to study. And then we have the 4 portals that are here, which is capacity building, practice, community building, and research. So capacity building is all the training, the introductory programs, and our master practitioner training, and so on and so forth, that we're kind of infusing into the field. In order for us to do things differently, we first have to learn new things. But it's not enough learning new things, we have to also actually apply them practically, and then practice them and practice them and practice them. So we learn new things, and then we try to apply them. And that's what the whole practice domain is, and we try to support people in doing that as well. It's very, we've seen ever so often that when people come alone, it can't really grow, because there has to be a community of people coming together doing this work. So the community building aspect is essential as well. More people doing the work together so that there can be peer learning and a space where you can go and feel, oh, I tried this out, it didn't really work, or they didn't want to listen to me, or whatever it is. That's really vitally important as well. And the last bit here is research. And aside, of course, from the fancy-ass research we do at universities and so on, there's also the much broader understanding of what research is, which is basically, what am I learning? My reflection on what's going on. What do I need to, how can I communicate this? What do I need to change? What are ways in which I can bring this forward, and so on. So that's what's really held in that domain. So those are the kind of ways in, or if you will, portals into how we're kind of seeding this field for compassionate systems change. And we can know about the seeds that we're planting that they are conducive for compassionate systems change, and we can know something about the nutrients that are needed coming in through these 4 portals, but we can't know the outcome. It looks and feels differently in each and every place because it's extremely contextual. It is an organic growing system. There are no 2 oak trees that are the same, there are no 2 carrots that are the same, there are no 2 leaves that are the same, and there's surely no 2 kind of compassionate systems change processes that are the same. The massive complexity of working with systems of living, breathing human beings that are growing in these systems makes it totally impossible to think that it'll be the same process. But the nutrients and the seeds and the stuff that needs to come in order to grow the processes, all of that can look and feel the same. So that's what we know something about. And then what we're looking for when we're kind of overlaying our lens here of our mandala is what we're looking for is generative social fields. Generative social fields basically means spaces where humans can grow. Spaces where when we're there, we can feel that we're seen and heard, and we can feel that there's a space for us to be who we are. Our whole vision for education is that at the heart of what we think of education, if our mental models could shift, it should be having generative social fields at the heart of it. I would like, if I could hold an aspiration for the world, I would like each and every kid who comes into school every day to come into a generative social field where they can feel safe and where they can feel seen, and there's somebody that cares about them and somebody they care about, and then they can grow and flourish and become the human being that they are. Not some cookie cutter approach, not trying to force them to become something else, but to be who they are so that they can bring their innate gifts of the uniqueness that is each individual being into the world. And so those are outcomes, generative social fields are outcomes that we look for when we're in this compassionate systems change process, because it seems like the vehicle for understanding something of, the indicators, if this is actually creating compassionate systems change, is the vehicle is that the fields more and more consistently become generative. So that's the kind of the methodology. So far, so good. Now, one thing that's become increasingly, generative social fields. Let me say 2 words about generative social fields. We have systems within ourselves, of course, in human systems. Still keeping track of time. Am I good? I'm good. Okay. I couldn't see you, Rich. I was just assuming you're nodding. We are used to talking about systems within the humans, right? We have the central nervous system and our cardiovascular system and so on. And there's also the emotional system. This alludes back to what I was saying at the beginning. We grow and develop our understanding of ourselves, of what it means to be me in this world, my biographical structures, my somatic markers, why I get triggered, when I get triggered, what are the emotional habitual ways I'm expressing myself, and so on and so forth. Because when we know that, we can begin to make choices about how we want to show up with it. We can have a reflective conversation with ourselves about why is this happening right now, and how is it serving or not serving me, and what do I want to do about it. So trying to put a lid on emotions, which most of us have been conditioned to do when they become overwhelming. We like to drink alcohol or eat cake, or drink alcohol and eat cake, or smoke cigarettes or smoke other things, or whatever it is that we like to do. We tend to, or binge watch a Netflix series of all of the above in one big portion. Anybody ever tried that? So we tend to do that because it's overwhelming with all these emotions that we don't know what to do with. And so at least we can make choices once we have cultivated this ability to have literacy about our own inner systems. The inner systems are directly influencing how our relational systems are. We, the humans, are an incredibly social species that we've by and large forgotten what that means. It means, for example, that when little ones are born, their brains are shaped by interaction, not by who they are innately, but by how they're in relationship with other people. That's literally how our brains are shaped. That's how our whole world of understanding is shaped. So we're a profoundly social species, which means that when I enter into a space, and if I started crying right now, some of you would have empathy with the situation. I don't know about you all. I usually start crying when other people cry. Anybody does that? Yeah? Some people it feels it's really awkward. and becomes kind of, I don't know what to do with that, and try to shut it away. Anybody ever experienced that? You're not a very responsive audience, and I know you are. I'm just saying. Then some people try to make it, make it go away by making jokes. The reason why we do that is because laughing does the same for the nervous system as crying does. It's a way of self-regulating or regulating for the nervous system to self-regulate. So when we don't know what to do with the tears, at least we can try with the crying, with the laughing. So those are kind of different strategies. Some will, if you've been very oppressed in your own emotional system when you were a kid, and somebody comes and becomes very emotional at you, you can become pretty obtrusive with them. Oh, great.
We're swapping. Oh, look, and I have a much nicer voice. I'm glad we swapped. Thank you. So basically that is the idea that we influence other people in the fields that we're in, and in return we're influenced by them, massively so. And we can go through life without ever really paying attention to it. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Think about the last time you came into a space where people have just been kind of really yelling at each other, or there had been aggression present or something. It's as if the air is all electric and you can kind of feel that there's something going on here. We have tried this before, right? And so all of that are indicators that we can learn how to really pay attention to, but it requires a certain amount of literacy. When we talk about then, the larger systems like our classrooms and our teams and families, schools, organizations, institutions, society, and so on, you know where they come from. They come from human systems enacting them all the time in their relational systems. They weren't magically done to us. All the institutions, all the ways in which we're organized, are constantly, consistently reenacted by all of us at all times. And this means that if change is going to happen, it has to start in here. We change and show up differently so that our fields that we operate in can change. And that is, in fact, what can bring change to the world. How many of you have been under some kind of reform initiative or change initiative, new curriculum, new policy, new structure, new something, that was really set up with great intentions, and people, most of you have, and people thought this is a great idea. And how many of you have seen it fall flat on its face and the system more or less kind of collapsing back to where it came from? Yeah, a pretty good overlay of the same things. That is because we forget to take into account the mental models. That if I have been teaching for 20 years in a particular way and you hand me a new curriculum, guess what's going to happen? I'm going to teach the new curriculum the exact same way as I was teaching all the old stuff. It doesn't actually work that way. We can't just change the artifacts and say, here are the new policies and here are the new reforms and here are the new curriculums, and then expect that to change anything. The mental models need to change as well, and that is hard work. That is part of why we cultivate our emotional literacy and cultivate our relational awareness and understand how we want to show up in spaces and so on. The good news is it's a liberatory process and extremely rewarding, but it is hard work, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it becomes a lifelong journey. The reason, of course, why we're so into kids learning this is then they don't have to unlearn all the stuff that most of us have had to unlearn to even be able to be on this journey. So if kids learn all these principles from onset on, I imagine the world could look very differently. So one thing that's become increasingly clear to me is that, and my primary motivation for, am I supposed to finish really soon? I have 5 minutes. Great. I have like 2 massive causal loop diagrams that I'm going to walk you through in 5 minutes. The declining mental health and well-being of children is really dramatic everywhere in the world. I get to work in many, many different countries everywhere I come. That's the primary concern that people hold. It's become increasingly clear to me, particularly after COVID, that the declining mental health and well-being of our children in this world has been kind of outsourced to have to do with the system of education, and that is utterly unfair. This is not a matter for education alone. We all have to be allies with the educators and make this a matter for society. Our kids are not thriving. In fact, we're the only species on this planet where our young ones are taking their own lives. That has to be something that we're deeply, profoundly listening to as a resonance from the field that tells us something about the structures in place are not conducive to human flourishing. In fact, they're doing the opposite. Our little ones can't thrive in them. And I know that there are kids who are thriving and so on and so forth. But think about it. If this is real, with the amounts of people who are not thriving and flourishing, what are they consistently bringing into the social fields? What are they consistently being exposed to? This is just taking it seriously what it actually is that we do to ourselves and each other. So we have this declining mental health and well-being everywhere in the world. And there was a great study that came out last year with 10,000 kids from 10 different countries, Australia being one of them, where kids pointed to climate change and the uncertainty of the future as the two main points of their kind of foundational anxiety. So we can say, well, if they're really afraid of the climate change and what does climate change increases extinction rates, the loss of habitats, so our ecosystems are collapsing, which is happening before our very eyes at this moment, by the way. It really perpetuates this unsafe future. It increases the floods and the droughts and the fires and so on. And what does that lead to? Well, it increases hunger and poverty, which is another denominator that kids are talking about that they're really that really brings that reflective kind of depressive state to them. It increases trauma and PTSD and migration, of course, because people can't live where it's not habitable any longer, so they have to move to other places, which then, of course, the collapsing ecosystem produces resource scarcity, destabilization of societies, and so on. We're in the middle of it right now. It increases inequity and social injustice, it increases polarization, it increases involvement, it increases the likelihood for armed conflict. Sounds like a current state of affairs to anyone. It decreases resilience, which increases dissociation, numbness, and overwhelm, which again kind of feeds directly into and is reinforcing the declining mental health and well-being. The polarization increases in-grouping, and that increases disconnect, and that leads to less collective action, which then increases the whole kind of misery in the first place, and it leaves us with a complete depleted sense of hope and belonging that of course also feeds into this. Now I put down here a key leverage point to me is the destabilizing societies, because clearly when this is what we're talking about, this cannot be a matter for education alone. This should never have been tasked with the educators in the first place, and I'm sorry for those of you who've tried to carry this burden for so long without the adequate support structure. It is not fair. I understand why there's a lot of burnout in education in and of itself, and you were never trained to handle all this trauma and all this fear and all this stress and depression, and many of you, of course, feel the same way yourself. So the key leverage point is, as I think, this is there's an African proverb. I tried to look up the source of it, and all it ever says is African proverb. No country where it's origin from, no nothing. But I think we all know it takes a village to raise a child. With this level of complexity here, I think we've kind of moved past that. It doesn't take a village any longer to raise a child. It needs to take at least a city. It needs to have all the layers of complexity and the structures that are kind of present there. So my thought was that we can use this as a key leverage point, and I like calling it good ancestor cities. What if we could produce these kinds of cities where there's decreasing inequity and social injustice, not by the kind of, superficial kind of inclusion strategies, but where we truly and profoundly want to live together in a space of equality and embracing that people are different and knowing and understanding that the most resilient ecosystems on this planet are the ones that are the most diverse. So diversity is really necessary for us to grow and thrive and flourish. It would decrease our polarization, increase resilience, decrease dissociation, numbness and overwhelm, and so on and so forth. Increase ability to have collective action, increase our ability to minimize the climate change the climate crisis locally, which is the only way we actually really can address it. And if we could, preserve and regenerate our local ecosystems, make sure there's fresh water also for generations to come, and so on and so forth. The sad thing is that for all of these things here, extinction rates, loss of habitat, floods, droughts, fire, all of that, we know everything we need to know about how to handle it. From a scientific perspective, it's not as if we don't know what to do. What we don't know what to do is to take collective action. We just don't seem to have that ability at the moment. But this might lead to, a greater possibility for collective action and would minimize all these things. I'm mindful that I have to stop now, but mostly it would decrease children's suffering. Putting them at the heart of societies where all of society come together with, it doesn't matter what you believe in, who you are, where you're from, whatever, all these things, that's not what this is about. But decency, dignified human being, wanting to do good, making sure that we have, take care of future generations as well, and engaging in restorative practices in all the various ways in which we can. What would happen with schools like that? What would happen when we go to a hospital if people were trained in this way, that this was the commitment that we all had? I mean, I get it. I've been in touch with the kind of governance structures in the United States. I understand why people want to get rid of that. It is absolutely messy. I'd love to share stories about it, but maybe over wine and lots of it. What I don't know is what that would do to, our whole kind of fixation on weapons. Obviously, these spaces would need to be protected, and I don't know if they would be, aggressors would come and try, and, or if there could be safe havens because we're taking care of children and so on. But at least I think it's worth the consideration, and part of what we are committed to doing now as our new next level of work at the center is really engaging in this way. And that's why growing these local mushrooms is so important, because imagine if we could have beacons of hope around the world where enough of the infrastructure comes together in a commitment to creating compassionate systems change, not just for us, but also for the generations to come. My hunch is there are many, many more people on this planet who would like to live like this than in the current trajectory we're on right now. We just haven't found a way yet to mobilize each other. We haven't found a way yet to figure out how to take collective action. And this might be a solution to that. So there are a couple of upcoming opportunities if anybody's interested next week. As I said, there is a workshop here in Melbourne that I'm leading. In January, we have our MIT Systems Awareness Lab conference. You're very welcome to join. We've been hugely inspired by this conference, so it's not at all boring being there. And then in March, Peter Siggy and myself lead one of our hybrid intro workshops at MIT as well, so for those of you who are interested. I'm supposed to leave you now with a couple of questions for your dialogue blocks. So my questions really is, how did this land with you? Did anything resonate, and what resonated? And if I was to contribute to creating a city like this, a good ancestor city, I'd like to certify them. I'd like to just create these and have real kind of commitment to seeing how many layers of regenerative structures can we put in place for people. What would your contribution be? Now, how would you envision living in a place like that? What would that do to you? So those would be my prompts for your dialogue blocks. Thank you very much.